Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this tutorial on CSS backgrounds. Now we're going to be taking a brief look at CSS backgrounds and also looking at some of the properties that we can apply to a container in order to place a background and do things with them and make them useful. So we're going to be incorporating a tiny tick image that we've seen in the previous video. We're going to be looking at placing this within a small container with a little message. So we'll create the container first so we can get a general idea of what we want, and then we'll go ahead and look at the background properties in CSS. So let's go ahead and load up our text editor. We've got a primary.css file which is linked into our document. We've got a blank document that we're going to go ahead and start creating this container on. So with the container, we want to create a div element, and I'm going to give this a class name of let's say message, and in here I'm going to say yes, you can do it. So a positive message there. Let's go over to our browser and refresh, and you can see that we've just got some text here. I've right clicked and inspected elements, so you can see we can keep an eye on our progress down here and also modify values if we need to. We might not be doing that in the tutorial, but if you're using Chrome or Firefox you can do. Okay, so what do we need to do now? Well, let's go ahead and style up our container itself. So the container is called message. The class is called message. And let's go ahead and style this up. So I'm going to give this a width of 200 pixels. I'm going to give it a border of 1 pixel, we'll say solid and black. I'll go ahead and give it a border radius of 5 pixels just so it looks a bit nicer. And already we have created that. Now what we want to do is go ahead and give this some padding so it's away from the edges of the container. However, we're going to be including a small tick image just before the text starts, so around this area here. So I want to include more padding on the left so the text is pushed more this way, and include the sort of same amount of padding on all the other sides. Okay, so what do we do? Well, we're going to use padding, and we'll say 2 pixels on the top. Let's just pull that in a bit. 2 pixels on the top, 2 pixels east, so on the right hand side, 2 pixels on the bottom, but I'm going to go for 25 pixels on the left. So when I refresh now, you'll see that I've got an equal amount of padding on the top, the right hand side and the bottom, but on the left I've got a padding of 25 pixels, and that's where our little tick image is going to go, just go in here. So I've got the tick image inside of the images directory here, just here. And we'll be using that to place as a background of this container. So normally you might think, well, I could just go ahead and place an image in there. Well, we can do the job with CSS, which is a lot more efficient. It allows for less markup, so it allows for quicker page load time. Your CSS file will be cached most likely by your browser, probably by the default settings. So if you have sort of a cached CSS file, you're using less markup, it's a lot more efficient. You're keeping things that don't really need to be in the markup away from the markup. So how do we do this? Well, let's go ahead and explain the background properties, the individual properties, and then we'll look at the shorthand. Now, we already know that we can use background image, so that's part of the background property set. Background color. So we can already use background color. We could say, black, for example, and that would just change the container to black. We can also use we can also use the shorthand just to set that background. Okay, so with regards to background images, what do we want to do? Well, let's go ahead and use the background image property and choose an image. So the image, as I showed you a moment ago, is contained within this images folder here. My CSS file is contained in its own folder, so we need to traverse back a directory before we locate that. We can use URLs by the domain, so we could address it by the domain. In my case it would be localhost because I'm running off my local web server. But let's go ahead and use URL and start to write this out. So I'm going to use a dot and a / to traverse back a directory. I'm going to go into the images directory and I'm going to go to tick.gif. Now when I go ahead and refresh the page, you'll notice that the background image has been applied to that container. You also would have noticed that it has repeated across, or tiled as it's more commonly called. So we need to correct this problem of the background image tiling. So we need to use another property which is going to stop it from doing this, and that is the background repeat property. So background repeat, we can choose a few options. We could say, for example, repeat X. Now what repeat X would do is it would include the image once and repeat on the X axis. So you'll see that it's included the image in the very top hand left hand corner, and it's repeated the image along the X axis here. We can also use repeat Y, as you may have guessed, and that will repeat it on the Y axis from where it's included. So quite useful if you're trying to create, some kind of edge effect, I guess. Or we can choose background repeat, no repeat. You might think of doing something like none, but that's a no-no. You want to go and say no hyphen repeat. So what that will do is that will just include one instance of the image. Now one advantage of including background images and tiling them is that you only have to include that image once. So if you do need to tile an image across the background of a container, you know that you only have to include that image once, and the browser will render that image hundreds and hundreds of times if required, and it won't actually use any extra server load or download any bandwidth to download that item. It will just be tiled by the browser. So that's another benefit. If you need to tile an image, don't go ahead and include loads of image tags. You're bloating the markup, and you're reducing you're increasing page load time. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go ahead and start to style this up a bit more. So we've included our background image, we've included our background repeat. Now we want to choose a position, because obviously at the moment the tick's right in the top hand left corner. We want to pull it down so it's sort of middle here, aligned with our text and away from the edge a bit. So what do we use? Well, we use the background position property. So the background position property will take two values. The first one will be the position like top, bottom, whatever. The second will be something like left or right, for example. So, for example, if I was to say background position right, what would happen? Well, it would just default to placing it in the right, and it would place it in the right, and by default it would place it central. So you can see that vertically it's been aligned centrally, horizontally it's been aligned right. However, I could say top right, and you'll see that that will place it at the top but at the right. So we can move this around using sort of textual representations of where we want it to be. Just as much as top, we can use bottom, center, and that will place it at the bottom central of that container. Now that's very clever, but what we want to do is we want to place it just here before the text, central. So we can use center for this property here. No, we can use central for this property here, but for this property, what do we do? Well, we can use pixels, we can use percentage. Probably for something like this that's a fixed width and fixed padding, we would use pixels. It'd be a lot more efficient. So 5 pixels, wrong way around, 5 pixels center. Refresh. So what's this done? Well, it's centered it vertically, and it's brought it 5 pixels away from the left. That doesn't look enough to me, so I'm going to say 10 pixels. And I'm going to refresh. Now that's perfect. So we've pulled it 10 pixels from the left hand side, and we've centered it vertically. Now remember earlier we actually left off this and it defaulted to center, so we can actually go ahead and remove that and refresh, and it stays the same. So we're reducing the size of our CSS file as well. Okay, so essentially now we've included our background image, we've said that we don't want it to repeat, and we've also spoken about repeating on the X and Y axis, and we've set a background position of 10 pixels, which has defaulted the second option to center. could leave it in, but we're not going to. So now we want to create this with less styling. So we want to include the shorthand property. So we're going to leave these options here for now, but I'll go ahead down here and I'll create the shorthand property as well as leaving them in. Then I'll remove them and we'll refresh and we'll see that everything stayed the same. Now I'm just going to go ahead in here and include the background color because that's quite important. I'm going to say FF, in fact we'll say EE or something. Actually we'll make it a bit darker. Okay, so we've included our background color, and the reason I've done that is because the shorthand background property also allows you to set a general background color as well. So as well as including this tick image, we can also include a background color. So at the moment I've chosen AAA, which is this dark grey type color. So you can see that we've still got our background color, but we've also included the image. So that's the beauty of doing this as well, is that we can have a general background color but also incorporate an image. Okay, so back onto the shorthand background property. Let's go ahead and say background. You'll notice that I've just written background. I haven't written background color, image, repeat, or position, so it's just background. The first option is the general background color, so AAA. So we can go ahead and get rid of that option there. Next is the image, so I'm just going to say URL and then again include images/tick.gif. Okay, so we've included that. We can go ahead and get rid of that. The third option, as you've probably already guessed, is no repeat. So I can go ahead and get rid of that. And last but not least is the background position. Now we can also again use top, center, a combination. The two options that we give here will take the same effect as if you were to use the background position property on its own. So we can go ahead and get rid of that. So we've included the same properties, but we've done it all on one line, and we've saved a lot of space, and we've also saved a lot of time because we've just typed it all on one line. So as long as you remember the color, the image, the repeating, whether it be repeat X, Y, or no repeat, and the position, whether you just be using one or two property values there. When we refresh, we have exactly the same result. So you can see here in our Explorer, we've got the width, blah blah blah, and we've got the background property just here, as we would expect. So that pretty much covers it. We've looked at the properties that we require to set a background image and style it correctly, and we've also then gone ahead and looked at the shorthand property, which I do recommend you use. So that is backgrounds in CSS.